From the San Francisco Public Press, you're listening to Civic. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, San Francisco's Latinx residents experienced higher rates of infection and deaths and greater losses of income and homes compared with other ethnic groups. The resulting trauma led to emotional breakdowns throughout the community.
People come up to me and say, I want to commit suicide. I want to die.
Mission neighborhood residents responded by creating a support network. That's when UCSF asked them to test a new therapy that combines an app with peer coaches to help them connect with each other.
We wanted to do technology-based stuff and bring in supporters within the community.
Now locals are envisioning a brighter future, and the project is getting kudos from the White House. I'm Sylvie Sturm, and you're listening to Civic. I think it's safe to say that we all share memories of 2020 that are, at best, unnerving and surreal. Eerily empty streets, grocery store shelves left barren after panic buying. All those faces covered with masks, but an uncovered face was sometimes more unsettling. And of course, the constant dread of ever-increasing infections and deaths. I don't like to dwell on those dark times, but there are plenty of people who can't push away their bad memories, no matter how much they may want to. Thousands of Latinx people in San Francisco are still traumatized by their experiences throughout the pandemic. Their rates of infection were higher than any other community because they're more likely to work essential jobs outside the home and live in crowded housing conditions. Years later, many still struggle with depression and anxiety from seeing loved ones get deathly ill and from losing their livelihoods and their homes. But hope is on the horizon. A grassroots effort and a psychiatric researcher from UCSF have come up with an innovative approach to mental health therapy that combines technology with peer counseling. UCSF first collaborated with the Latinx community back in April 2020 when they partnered with a newly formed grassroots group called the Latino Task Force to test 4,000 people for COVID-19 in the Mission District, which is known for its large Latinx population. KPIX reported on the efforts.
Latinos in San Francisco make up 23% of coronavirus cases in the city, yet only 16% of the population. Now UCSF wants to test the population living in the Mission District.
Nearly a year later, Dr. Diane Havlier talked about the project during a presentation that was broadcast by UCTV.
What we had noticed in the hospital at San Francisco General, whereas typically about 20% of our persons were hospitalized were Latinx, over 80% of all the patients who were being hospitalized for COVID were Latinx. So what did we find out when we set out to test all these thousands of people that were in the mission? First of all, we found out that COVID positivity was 20-fold higher in the Latinx versus the non-Latinx population. Secondly, early infections occurred across a large range of demographics. But then, as the weeks went by, the infections predominantly settled in frontline workers. So you can see the race ethnicity in early infections was much more distributed among Latinx and white population compared to the most recent infections when we were testing, when 96% of those infections were all in the Latinx population. And also when we looked at the worker types, 93% were those frontline workers, those individuals who couldn't stay at home and protect themselves from COVID. These were the frontline workers that were keeping the city going when people were in their homes or their apartments working remotely.
Longtime Mission District resident and activist Roberto Hernandez explained how the city's shifting economy and lack of housing protection led directly to the spreading of COVID in his community.
We all know the gentrification story here in the Mission, back from .com boom and then tech boom. So you have Latinos who are living, who once upon a time had a 2-bedroom and a family of 5. Now that family of 5 is living with 13 other people because they're all trying to survive. And so you have 18 people living in a 3-bedroom. And so one goes out gets COVID, comes home, doesn't know it has COVID, and the rest of everybody else gets COVID.
The high rates of infection caused hundreds of families to lose jobs, income, and homes. Hernandez said he canvassed his neighborhood at the time and found people in utter despair.
Mental health was like right on top of the chart. And then I found that a lot of people were medicating. Doctors were prescribing drugs they should have never been prescribing. People were excessively drinking alcohol. Some got into drugs that they shouldn't have gotten into, street drugs. And so I really became concerned about that and really saw and witnessed, some anger. People that really displayed a lot of anger. I had one guy that died from alcoholism. He just drank himself to death. I had another guy that OD'd. So I saw some very horrifying things that happened during the pandemic because of the pandemic.
Hernandez is dubbed the People's Mayor of the Mission for his years of grassroots organizing and activism, especially in protest of evictions. During the COVID crisis, he again found a way to help his community in ways that snowballed beyond even his own expectations.
I got a call from an elderly woman that I know who told me her story, that she had been working for 33 years in a restaurant. She lost her job because the restaurant, of course, closed. And she moved in her daughter with the 5 grandkids because the son-in-law had died 2 years prior. I said, how can I help you? She goes, I have no money. I told her, go collect unemployment. She had no idea what unemployment was because you were for 33 years. I'm trying to explain this every way possible. Finally, at the end, I said, hey, get your paycheck stub. And she goes, I don't get a paycheck. And I'm thinking, okay, well, your direct deposit. She was a cash worker. My heart just dropped. And I said, what is the one thing that I can do for you? And she said, Roberto, she goes, we only have food left one day. I go, don't worry, I'll go buy groceries. And out of my pocket, went and buy groceries, and I bought her groceries, and the phone just kept ringing and ringing and ringing. And one story after another, all about food, lost a job.
When Hernandez realized how many people were going without food, he began leveraging his contacts in business, nonprofits, and government to launch a food bank called the Mission Food Hub. The Mission Food Hub opened in a warehouse on Alabama Street in May 2020, and it was quickly inundated with people in need. Initially, 500 families lined up once a week for fresh fruit, vegetables, rice, beans, meat, masa, canned goods, milk, and other essentials. In very little time, that grew to more than 7,000 families lining up 3 times a week. And Hernandez made sure that the products he chose did more than simply feed their bodies.
And one of the things that I did through the pandemic, again, to deal with this whole mental health issue, right? Saying, okay, señora, what would you like? She goes, Roberto, I'd like aguacates. Somebody else said naranjas, and somebody else said bananas, or somebody else said arroz or frijoles. And even the frijoles, we got the pinto beans, and Peruvian señora said, could you get us some red beans? Because in Peru, we eat red beans. Mister, you got it. And so everything that we bought was based on what the people in our community wanted. And so that's why I say food is medicine.
Despite these efforts, a widespread mental health crisis took hold in the community. For many, depression set in because they were unable to work.
Latinos, you don't find us on a street corner with a sign saying, hey, give me $1. You'll find our people on the street corner ready to go work. Whether it's go clean your yard, clean your house, paint your house. We'll do anything and everything. And so to be taken away from that was the beginning of the mental health breakdown of the individuals and then of families, because that impacted families. People come up to me and say, I want to commit suicide. I want to die. I can't work. I can't support my family. For me, that was horrifying. I've been through a lot of challenges in my life, and I'll tell you, that was like one moment I felt very helpless.
Connie Rivera also felt desperate during those dark times. Rivera moved to San Francisco from Mexico City 30 years ago. She and her husband operate 2 stores in the Mission District that sell indigenous crafts.
We lost our jobs. A lot of people lost families. We were losing families, friends. And when they say we gotta close everything, we gotta stay home, we were like, wow. We see that was reality. Like, we didn't know that it was happening until I had kids, and my kid gotta stop going to school and gotta stay home, and we were inside, and for somebody to go out and get food, and also the big lines, and also everything. So I think the most hard part was the mental, and also the economy. They're not able to bring money or income, the rent, when we don't have money to pay the rent, but we have to still pay the rent. And otherwise, we were afraid, scared about we were being kicked out from our apartments, so we leave. Honestly, pandemic hit us so bad, like as workers and low-income people and hard workers, we live day by day. We don't have savings. We were not prepared for any of this.
It wasn't just Mission residents who were suffering. A study published in the Cognitive Therapy and Research Journal in 2021 reported that 40% of Latinx respondents across the U.S. felt increased pandemic-related anxiety or depression, compared with only 29% of white respondents. And another study published in 2020 by the CDC indicated that Latinx people experienced higher COVID-19-related trauma, substance use, and suicidal thoughts compared to whites. Despite evidence of a need for mental health support, Latinx communities generally avoid professional help. Part of it is cultural. The Latino culture has a long tradition of stigmatizing professional mental health therapy.
One of the things growing up as a child, being a Latino young boy, child, right, is that if you went to therapy, está loco. Oh, mira, está loco. Did you hear so-and-so seeing a psychiatrist? Está loco. It was this stereotyping that if you had a problem mentally, that's local, you're crazy.
When Rivera was a child, she was admonished for suggesting she was sad and told to redirect her feelings into work.
We never talk about it. Even you're not feeling well, or you feel bad or depressed, or you got your anxieties or your fearness. We don't never talk about it because that's how we being grew up. Like, no, there's not time for that. Or if you say something, they're gonna ignore you. You say, I don't feel good. Yeah, I have nothing to do. Okay, you have nothing to do. There's a lot of stuff to do. Go do it. But you're not talking about physical. You're talking about mental.
But it's not just cultural stigma that hampers access to mental health resources. Local activist, artist, and university lecturer Paul Flores helped create a mental health support group in the Mission after the pandemic. We'll get to that in a minute. First, he explained the complex reasons why people in Latinx communities are less likely to seek mental health treatment.
One is our own culture, and the other is kind of like just the whole chauvinism and disrespect for Latinos and Spanish speakers in San Francisco institutionally, systematically. There is this idea that if you go to the doctor to seek out mental health services, you must be crazy. And that's a cultural thing within our own community, right? We have a little bit of machismo in there. The second thing is based on historical practices and experience in which we don't build very good relationships with health institutions, particularly the larger ones at hospitals. We've been constantly treated badly, historically been denied services. Access is always in another language, not our own. We do not create good relationships with doctors. Doctors often dismiss our symptoms and our problems because there's a lot of prejudicial stereotyping that happens from the doctor's perspective on our community. Oh, why do you have so many kids? Oh, you're not really sick. It's just your diet is bad. All this stuff, right? It'll go away. Take some Advil. Those types of things. That's what doctors say to our community, particularly the moms. And often, these explanations for our children's problems, whether they battle depression and anxiety, are kind of like put to blame on the parents. without knowing what the parents are really struggling with. If you're not an immigrant, you don't know what this parent is going through. Don't try to diagnose a family problem if you don't have a cultural understanding of what trauma this parent has gone through in order to support that child. And this is the issue. There is no cultural competency within mental health.
Flores wanted to investigate what was happening to low-income Latinx people living in single-room occupancy buildings during COVID. He figured the Mission Hub was a good place to connect with others who might have stories to tell. But once he began hearing from them, the study took a completely different turn.
What do we miss doing since the pandemic? And everybody's like, oh, you know what I miss? I miss hugging, shaking hands, having a carne asada on the weekend, going to the bar and playing pool. I miss my friends. All of the isolation had created such immense depression and anxiety in our community, and they had nowhere to put it. What I thought was going to be a racial justice project became a mental health project. It became about how do we address the total feeling of helplessness, fear, depression, loss. Yeah, several of our members had gotten divorced during the pandemic. Some of the stories they told about, like, all of a sudden they were forced to live with their partner on a minute-by-minute basis, and how the work balance had also balanced their relationship. Now they were not working, so there was a lot of finger pointing. When are you going to get money for this? And so, one person would feel all the pressure and then drink themselves to sleep until that created a lack of kind of communication, and then divorce and things like that. Just super emergencies that folks were not ready to deal with. There are people whose children suffered hella problems, mental health problems that they were not getting through, had lost access to their health supports. No one was getting paid because nobody had a citizenship. It was so much fear. And then the group basically started to ask us, okay, what are we going to do about this?
The people he met eventually formed a group called Somos Esenciales. We are essential. Among them was Connie Rivera.
We were, and we still are essentials. Because we were the ones who, in that time, we risked our lives to help each other, to help the other communities, our communities too. We're now essentials with this. Somos Esenciales. We're still here. We made it. We thank Creator for letting us be here and continue doing what we have to do and help others. If we can help somebody else and change for a better life or for better opportunities in terms of mental, we will do it.
A crucial part of her healing was undoing the way she was taught to think about mental health therapy.
We got to break the taboo. We're breaking it. I thank God, and I thank the people who are being there for me, and I'm able to speak and talk about it, about my fearness, about my traumas, about how I feel, my depression, because I'm a normal person, and yes, I've been through depression, I've been through anxiety, I've been through fearness too, but I can say now that I'm healing. I've been healing, but not by myself, but the help with my family, my husband, and also by professional doctors and friends who have been there for me.
Members of Somos Esenciales asked others in the community about their experiences with COVID and how they were managing their mental health.
We talked to the community and people who were in the street or walking around and asked about this question, why mental health is important and you want to talk about it. Do you need help? How are you? How you been? And then it start from those 2-3 questions. Then it's long stories of each person has to say.
Flores recorded some of his interviews for his short documentary film titled We Are Essential, Our Mental Health is Essential.
I have a weakened immune system. Well, every 6 weeks I go in for an infusion. So the doctor had told me, you get corona, you're 90% liable that you're gonna die. Whoa, I see my hat on the stairs. One! It was all my mind just messing with me all the time. Emotionally, it was terrible. how am I gonna be there for my kids? Look at the situation I'm at right now. And then, are they gonna be okay? And I'm hearing every day, all these people are dying and dying and dying, and I'm all like, okay, I got it. I'm next to die.
For me, I was like, I need to be strong. I can't be crying in front of the kids, you know? Because if they saw me crying, like my mom said, they automatically thought they're gonna die, you know? And I'm just like, no, they're not gonna die. It's gonna be okay, you know? But like deep inside, I also had that fear. And like when we had to come back to the point where my mom had to sleep with us, like I finally was able to feel everything, and I was just like, you know, I can breathe.
Flores and members of the group also reached out to UCSF doctors who had previously helped organize COVID testing in the mission.
The doctors came to our meetings and they're like, all right, everybody, we're going to have mental health classes. And the first theme is anxiety, boom. And then it was like, whoa, they started learning all this technical lexicon and words and confused about it. But then they started to break it down. We invited a Spanish-speaking children's book author who wrote a book about anxiety and depression in the Latino community through a kid's perspective, so the parents could help each other identify it. And then we got into getting deeper into like, how do we identify depression in ourselves? When have we seen it? Maybe you feel it, but you don't know how to identify it. And so we're building skills little by little with the help of the UCSF doctors.
The effort led to the creation of another group called Supera.
The word supera, particularly in the Latino immigrant working class community, superarse means to overcome all the challenges, right? And achieve through the difficulty. So it's like a word for being resilient.
The members of Supera wrote a report that detailed the decline in mental health for Latino immigrant laborers and the Mission neighborhood community during COVID. The report outlined what they did to cope and recommendations to improve their well-being. That led to an invitation to talk about their efforts among prestigious circles.
We presented over at UC Berkeley for the Latinx mental health conference. And here we are, a bunch of immigrant laborers talking about how they support other folks with mental health problems in Spanish. So we had everything translated. And all of a sudden, like these doctors came up to them afterwards and they were like, can you help us deal with this issue? And these people have even graduated 6th or 7th grade. It was wild. And all of a sudden their confidence just went because they had some skills. They were acknowledged as serious support mechanisms inside the community who had knowledge that real doctors could use.
Among those doctors was Adrian Aguilera. He's an associate professor in the School of Social Welfare at UC Berkeley and the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at UCSF. Aguilera had an idea for a form of mental health therapy that could meet the community's needs.
I grew up in Chicago in a Mexican neighborhood, very much like the mission. So for me, that is the reason I came into this work, is to provide mental health support for people that look like my family, like my community.
Aguilera reached out to the Mission Neighborhood Group to pilot a new Spanish-language mental health app that would guide people who were dealing with anxiety and depression while also connecting them with their peers, like Connie Rivera.
When she first started this project, she told me, she said, I wanted to be a psychologist when I was younger. And I think she really latched on to this project in particular to be able to do some of this that she's felt that she was capable. It came naturally to her. But I think she does it in her day-to-day work, right? She has her store and people come to her for like advice and support on a day-to-day basis, right? So she's already doing that. And this is doing it maybe in a different way. We wanted to do technology-based stuff and provide kind of access and scale, but then also bring in the community and bring in supporters within the community to work with people while they're engaged in this technology, right? So it's not a purely, here's this website, go do it, but it's also, here's this resource, and here's a supporter that's going to guide you, coach you along the process, be a cheerleader, and can understand your lived experience.
One of the things in the app that you've got to learn how to do, cognitive recognition of your feelings. Anxiety is, you understand that it's usually based on unreasonable emotions or fears. worries that things could happen but might not. Like, oh my God, if I get behind the wheel, I'm going to crash because I had a crash once. So I can't get behind the wheel because I'm going to crash. It's like, well, are you? You've been driving for hella years and you've had one bad crash. Let's think about that. And that's what the app does around explaining what anxiety is and helps you work through it. Connie's job is to guide them through it. So she either does it through texting or writing. She's actually delivering a type of mental health service digitally, according to the instructions that the app and that her training have instructed.
The pilot project is now in its study phase, but first the researchers had to overcome a few hurdles. One major challenge was that some people had virtually no computer literacy, but they were undaunted thanks to the confidence they got from being part of Supera.
Having middle-aged immigrant laborers go address doctors on their experience with mental health and being a mental health researcher or a researcher, calling themselves researchers, when half of them have challenges reading, and then to be able to speak eloquently and authentically on it, built the confidence that would be necessary to be like, yeah, I'll learn this app. I don't know how to open up a Google email yet, but I will do this. And that determination is beautiful. It's beautiful.
Not everyone is convinced that a mental health app is the best approach. Roberto Hernandez said he prefers more personal solutions.
I'm not in favor of technology. And I think that a lot of these apps are just cookie cutters. It's very impersonal and healing. It's me being able to see your eyes, that beautiful smile that you're sharing with me. That gives me joy. That gives me happiness.
Mental health apps are not unprecedented, and studies have shown that they can help relieve anxiety and depression. Andrea Graham published data in 2020 on the effectiveness of a mental health app called IntelliCare, which she helped design to ease symptoms of anxiety and depression. Graham is co-director of the Center for Behavioral Intervention Technologies at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine.
I'm trained as a licensed clinical psychologist. I believe that in-person treatment is necessary for some people, but we will never solve the world's mental health crisis by only relying on clinicians. Like, we have to think more creatively. Peers are amazingly well positioned to couple with apps to really provide services using coaches. Our coaches were lay professionals, so they were not clinicians. They were supervised by a clinician who was me, but they themselves were not clinicians in doing the coaching. And there's plenty of data to support really strongly that we don't need specialists to deliver apps well and still provide a lot of great benefit. And in our trial, we saw effect sizes that were comparable to what people can achieve in face-to-face therapy.
That desire to reach people who would otherwise fall through the cracks is a driving force behind Aguilera's mental health app.
If people go out and look for it, they can't find it because there's not enough capacity. Even the people that have gotten over their stigma, because if you suffer enough, you know what? Surprisingly, stigma starts to go away because you're suffering. But so we need obviously more of that type of service, but we also need just different kinds of programs, things that go to the community versus just sitting in my office and waiting for people to come to me. We're reflecting the reality of people's lives, especially Latino folks who are working. They work more than the typical 9 to 5, and that's when the offices are open. Well, then they're never going to get any services, right? So no, is technology the answer to everything? Absolutely not. But I think it's a resource, and I think it's a resource that can fit into the lives of our community in some way.
Another hurdle for the pilot project was overcoming suspicions about large bureaucratic agencies, which have a history of inflicting trauma and injury.
I have to work with this National Institutes of Health, and part of it is our community's distrust of the government, huge distrust, which is one of the reasons why COVID continues, because we didn't want to listen to anybody. We didn't believe anybody. A lot of distrust in our community leads to misinformation and elongated suffering. That's part of just being oppressed, right? Is that you build distrust for the leaders around you because you feel like you're always being taken advantage of. So I think folks like Adrian and Dr. Lisa and myself are building that way to coalesce around, let's get the government to support our needs, but let's not let them take advantage of us.
Although the project is still years away from completion, it's already received accolades from the White House. In June, a blog post by the Office of Science and Technology Policy acknowledged Somos Esenciales, UCSF, and Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital for researching digital mental health solutions in resource-limited settings that emphasize cultural and linguistic inclusivity.
We're probably going to recruit for another 2.5 years because we're trying to get about 450 people into the project. Right now, we're only at about 15 to 20.
So in 2-3 years' time, you'll have your...
We should have all the results and see kind of how the project worked, how many people we reached, whether folks got better, those kinds of things. I mean, in the interim, we'll see, we can have more of a sense anecdotally how things are going. But people have their first supporters and they already feel this sense of command, I think, that they didn't have 2-3 months ago before they got there. And then hopefully once the evidence is shown, then we can find ways to implement these types of programs. And so we would need to find ways to make this sustainable, either via the health system in some way or via the community. So that's yet to be determined. But the first step is, does this work, right? And if it does, then we can say, all right, let's do something like this.
I'm Sylvie Sturm, and you've been listening to Civic. Civic comes to you from KSFP LP 102.5 FM in San Francisco, a project of the San Francisco Public Press, a nonprofit investigative newsroom. Find the accompanying article for this episode and all our reporting at sfpublicpress.org. Our theme music is by John Dillon. Additional music was supplied by the Blue Dot Sessions. Our team includes producer Leanna Wilcox, KSFP Program Director Mel Baker, and Executive Director Lila LaHood. Civic airs Tuesdays and Thursdays at 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. on KSFP. New episodes on Thursdays. Find everything going on with Civic and the San Francisco Public Press by signing up for our newsletter at sfpublicpress.org/newsletter. Thanks for listening.